So we're here talking about Abel,
Yeah.
what it looks like to practice the way Jesus, and today we wanted to talk about enemy love.
Yeah.
Now, when I think of enemy love,
Yeah.
and I
Something
think of
you do every day.
every
as you brush
day,
your
right?
teeth.
Like
Yeah.
I have like spiritual disciplines and like prayer and Bible reading,
Sure.
that fits. But like enemy love. Now,
Yeah.
why are we talking about enemy love as a practice? Like for you, where do you
Sure.
begin the conversation?
Yeah, certainly we can do it biblically. One story comes to
Yeah.
mind. So I remember when I was in my early 20s, I worked at a group home, right? So this was for teens that were incarcerated essentially.
Okay.
They had a drug background and some mental health background. And I went to work there. So I would live in the group home with the teens.
Yeah.
And I remember there were days when they would get so mad at me, and my house was like on the property, and I would literally stand at my door before I went out there,
Yeah.
and I'd have to like prepare myself, right? Because I was not very good at responding to their frustration directed at me
Totally.
in a way that sort of spoke of God's love.
Yeah.
So there was this sort of betrayal of these people trying to love me or hating me,
Yeah.
frustrated me. And I'm saying I'm a follower of Jesus, and yet all I want to do is yell
Totally.
back
Yeah.
at them.
Not Jesus-like.
Yeah. And so this is where I think the conversation of like, what does it look like to practice or train
Yeah.
in enemy love actually becomes important.
Totally.
Because my experience was I was thrown into this midst of these youth that effectively became my enemies, and I had no idea how to love them.
Like how to do that.
How to do it.
How to
right?
grow in that.
How to grow
Mature
in
in that. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So Jesus says in Matthew 5, "You have heard it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." That's the traditional teaching. But I say to you, this is Jesus' word, right? Love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you.
Yeah.
Right. So he actually wants us to be a people
Totally.
who can do this.
Yeah.
Who can go into, right, whatever situation confronts us in our life, in our family, in our workplace, on the street, on Facebook,
Yeah.
wherever. And he wants us to be a people that actually love our
Totally.
enemies, that pray for them.
Yeah. Totally.
And then the thing that's fascinating to me is he says, this verse 45, he says, so this is the reason.
Okay.
So why do we do this?
Yeah.
Right? So that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, sends rain on the just and on the unjust. Right? So it's like, wait, why do we do this? So that we can image God
Yeah,
in the world.
totally.
That when we actually aren't able to love our enemies, we do not witness to who God
Yeah,
is.
we're not embodying the character of God.
Yeah.
We're not displaying
So
God's
this is
character.
like, if we're going to train in something,
Yeah.
we should probably train in the thing that actually reveals the character of God in everyday life.
Totally. Yeah. And it seems to me as like, you're reading that paragraph from Matthew 5 that's Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. It seems like that just kind of reverberated all throughout his followers and apostles.
Totally.
Do you think like the rest of the New Testament,
Yeah.
Paul talks about this, Romans
Totally.
12, Romans
Yeah.
5, about how Christ, while we were enemies, Christ died for us.
Yeah.
Then Paul also applies it to the church in Rome that we're
Yeah.
called to bless
Totally.
those who persecute us.
Yeah.
Peter
And-
has
Yeah,
stuff
Jesus
on this.
dies.
Yeah, Jesus dies
Yeah,
like
Jesus,
this. Yeah.
Jesus dies. Paul dies. Peter dies.
Yeah.
All of the disciples, other than John, all die without starting a
Yeah.
insurrection, without gathering followers and leading a revolution. They all die
Totally.
with this ethic
Yeah.
sort of deeply ingrained in who they were.
Totally. And for them, they just believed that the power of loving one's enemies was greater than any other
Totally.
sort of human way that
Totally.
to treat other people. And it seems to me, thinking about not only this 2,000 years ago when the scriptures are written, when Jesus
Yeah.
is teaching, think about our moment
Yeah.
right now, how we're in such divisive,
Yeah.
polarized times where it seems to me we often just hang out or listen to people that only think like us, and
Totally.
we end up kind of downplaying or looking down on other people
Yeah.
that are different.
Yeah.
You know, I was reminded, like last football season, the NFL season,
Yeah.
there was an interesting thing that happened during one of the Dallas Cowboys games where President Bush and Ellen DeGeneres were seen in the same kind of viewing box
Yeah.
of
Like enjoying
like
one
enjoying
another.
one another's company. They're laughing together, and all these pictures of them having a good time
they kinda
together
go viral on
Go
the internet.
viral,
Yeah.
yeah. And if you know anything about either one of these people,
They're not the two people you would expect.
exactly.
hanging out.
They're
Yeah.
polar opposites on cultural, political stuff all over the place. But what was interesting, what happened was that after that, Ellen DeGeneres got so much flack for how could you hang out with someone like, George Bush? He's X, Y, and Z, blah, blah, blah. And what was really interesting, I really appreciate about this from Ellen, is that she gets on her show a few days later and just basically comes out and says, like, you know what? To be just human, I don't want to just hang out with people that think like me, look like me, agree about everything that I, agree on. I want to have friendships with people across the spectrum. I think, loving our enemies, kind of relating it back to this, one of the, I think, in our cultural moment, one of the most, I think, tangible ways we can do that is just practicing listening to one another, hearing each other's stories with people we don't agree with, or we might think, they're the worst thing since whatever, and just really having this relational feel with people and kind of cutting against the grain of our polarization and all the divisiveness in our world.
Because we often think back to like the first century. You think of Nero, you think of Domitian, think of these emperors that are like killing people, and you're like, oh, love my enemies. But when we actually fast forward into our moment, like actually loving your enemies might be like actually listening to the person on the other side of the political aisle. Listening to someone who is a different age group, different sexual orientation. Just like being present to people, not agreeing, not like endorsing, but being present. When I think practically what Jesus says here, right? He's like, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. And I think all of us have had those experiences where someone is not nice to us. Right? They might not be persecuting on the side of like throwing us into, a coliseum
jail,
with lions. But like a certain level of like, they know you're a Christian and they treat you poorly because of it. Like, what do we do? Do we get up in arms and so mad and say, well, I'm entitled to this? Or do we fall on our knees and pray for them? I think this is when we're talking about training. This is what we're talking about. Like, what does it look like to do the small things so that when those big moments come, when we really need to love our enemies, we're actually the kind of people who can.
It almost seems like as Jesus is giving those instructions, he knows that this is going to be difficult and hard. So it seems like he's even giving almost, if you want to call it this, like baby steps in that direction, where it's this small thing of praying and showing, small acts of love that build and reinforce kind of these patterns and overall behaviors, or will become the character of God, embodying the character of God in these moments. So this doesn't mean like you need to pray for 10 hours for your enemy. It can always just be a small, short, simple, God help me, or God bless them, or something short. But getting the ball rolling in that direction, I think, is helpful.
I think prayer can be a good start, listening. I think small acts of kindness. So like someone in your workplace that you don't like. Maybe your spouse right now. Feel like you're sort of in this enemy relationship. What does it look like for you to do something that expresses God's love for her or for him? Because I think that's what we're trying to get at. Like, how do we express the affection and love that God has for this person? How do we embody that? Versus how do we embody maybe an ethic of you get what you get?
The retaliation is
totally. Do you have any stories in your life of like ways you've tried this or failed at it?
I have, just as far as time goes, a really long story, but kind of maybe a short version. I had a fairly bad experience in a church that I previously had worked at, and it created some tension with a few people, and someone who was really close to me in particular. And I remember, this was 5, 6, 7 years ago. But just over the past few years, just God really working on my heart and in my mind of like, how do I respond to a situation that I felt I wasn't treated right? And someone that I really care about deeply. And one of the small things I felt God inviting me to was first, like what Jesus was saying, like just begin praying for this person. And then also there was the one moment, like very specifically, to just simply write a handwritten letter to this person, just confessing some things that I had done wrong. And it was just kind of this weird moment kind of thing. And I put it off for months, but I ended up eventually doing that. And one thing led to another. And since, not that everything's perfect, but so much of our relationship I feel like has healed. And I'm not trying to get any credit for that, but I think it was that small thing of faithfulness and seeing God work through that.
And I guess maybe so then from a training perspective, as people are listening to this video of like, what does it look like to train an enemy love? Maybe it starts with, in the presence of Jesus, wondering, all right, God, who in my life right now is my enemy? And just allowing God to bring to mind one or two people that you're kind of in an enemy posture with. And then say, okay, God, where should I start? And if you don't know, start with prayer. Right? You're like, I have no idea. Okay, then prayer, right? Because Jesus says it. But if you do have an idea, maybe it is writing a letter. Maybe it's an act of kindness. But maybe it's sort of a humble step of moving towards that person versus pushing against.
It takes I love what you're saying about the intimacy and connection with Jesus there, because I think all of this we're trying to anchor it back into, like you talked about earlier, the character of God
Yeah.
and who He is. So if we're kind of divorced or apart from the presence of God, it's going to be hard for us to be in tune with what God's inviting us to, because this is all about embodying the love of God.
Yeah.
And it implies, really importantly, that we are connected with God in those moments.
Yeah.
So we can end up doing that.
That's good. Yeah.
So,
I think that works.
yeah.
Thanks,
Awesome.
man.